Hello and welcome to this week's Property Matters. It's the first show of 2020. A happy new year to all. And you can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or by email at hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your host today is myself, Carol Tallon. Brian Fox is away today, but he will be joining us over the next few weeks. And we've an exciting lineup ahead for our very first show of the decade. Up first and in studio with me today is Barry Cull, Head of Homes in South Dublin for AIB. Barry, we're delighted you were able to join us in studio today. So, a new year, a new decade, homes in South Dublin. Where do we start?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Carol. I suppose, it's that time of year, I think, where people start to consider maybe whether it's a move or potentially getting on the property ladder, because I think there's conversations had over Christmas and big decisions made. So
that's always the way. The new year is a great time for the property market, and sometimes it isn't recognised as that, but I actually always think that big decisions are made between Christmas and New Year.
Absolutely,
they might not be acted on, but they're made.
Yeah, I think the ball is started rolling, I suppose, early in January, and as you say, people might not actually get into a new home or get involved in the bidding process until February or March, but decision is made, and now's the point from our perspective that we're seeing a lot of customers coming in looking to see what could they buy, what's available, how much could they qualify for, and all the typical first-time buyer and mover questions.
Okay, well, look, let's start right at the beginning. So decision is made. People are looking for a new home, whether it's a first-time buyer or maybe somebody who is looking to trade up or down. So from a mortgage point of view, what's the first step they should be taking?
I think the obvious one is come in and talk to somebody, because I think that there's a huge amount of information out there, but it's still the best thing is to sit down and talk to an expert. So I think that one of the things that we've seen in the market actually and in our customers' behaviour is they want different options. So they want to be able to talk to us online, they want to be able to talk to us face to face, or to meet us outside of our working hours. So we're able to facilitate all of those.
Okay.
But what it means for the customer is they get in, they get some sense early on of what's their budget. So how much could they qualify for? What's realistic for them? And from our perspective, then it gives us an idea as to what type of a home they may be looking for, and we could help, and how we could help and support them as well. So.
And Barry, how long have you been working in mortgages?
So working in mortgages about 15 years.
Okay, so you were there pre-crash?
I was there pre-crash, during crash, and out the other side as well.
Out the other side.
Yeah.
So actually, this is something I'm always interested in. It's something I ask estate agents about as well. You know, it's consumer behaviour. Yeah. I'm interested when consumers come into you inquiring about a mortgage, you know, compared to maybe the consumers of 15 years ago, how informed are they?
I actually think they're much better informed, and I suppose the fact that there's access to so much information online now has made a real difference. So I also think, Carol, that the days of somebody coming in almost cap in hand are probably gone, thankfully, because I think you have an educated customer base, we have customers coming in, they have a certain amount of knowledge, and they've some sense of what they want, which is definitely a change. The best example I would give is most of our customers know that they can get 3.5 times the income, but they're also aware of the central bank limits and how could they get an exception. So the type of questions we get asked are much more detailed than they might have been 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, you know, sometimes applying for a mortgage can be a bit like a marathon, and you don't want to turn up on the day unprepared. So I think one of the things I've seen, particularly from a first-time buyer perspective, is that first-time buyers are terribly well prepared. You know, as in they're not deciding to get a mortgage. They're spending 6 months training, getting their finances fit before they make that application.
And one of the things we love to see is someone coming in and saying, don't think I'm ready right now, but what can I do to get ready? And that's great. That's a great conversation for us to have, because we'll sit you down and talk through maybe simple things like how making sure you get your savings up to scratch. And one important thing I think, particularly for first-time buyers, is to bear in mind that when we're looking and assessing a customer's affordability, we're looking at the behaviour on their bank statements. So it's making sure that in the months leading up to application, that they actually have really good bank statements, that you can see evidence of saving, that it's kind of clear they've avoided referral charges or anything like that. So we get a lot of customers that will come in looking for that sort of a steer, and that we're able to keep with them on the journey then over the next 6 months or a year.
Okay. In terms of behaviours to avoid, I remember, 15, 16 years ago when I was getting my first mortgage, it was things like not making cash withdrawals late at night at the weekends. What's the modern equivalent of that?
I think so. Some of the myths that are out there, we won't overanalyze the bank statements to the extent of that. One of the things that was out a couple of years ago was, that your average millennial we'd be scrutinising to see how much they spent on avocados and cappuccinos. It's not that bad. It really isn't.
Well, actually, I recommend everybody take a look at how much they're spending on cappuccinos. There's probably a savings there to be made. But what are the big no-nos? We read a lot about online gambling.
Yeah.
So
there's a difference, I suppose, between... So when we talk about something like online gambling, the difference between somebody putting €10 on at Cheltenham or the occasional bet, that's absolutely fine. What you don't want to see is a pattern of any sort of dysfunction in it. In terms of the rest of it, of the bank statement piece, we need to see that you can afford the repayment. And that might sound very simplistic, but we want to see. So sometimes you can get people coming in and they want to go from a point where maybe they've been saving a very small amount, and then the mortgage they're taking on is quite substantial. So either.
But what if they've been paying rent at the same time? And does that count towards it?
This is absolutely a key part of it. The rental, and we're in South Dublin, so this is something that's crucial. A lot of our customers are paying really high rents, and that proves repayment capacity. So one of the things to make sure on your bank statements is that we can clearly see your rent going out.
But if rent going out, if they've managed to amass savings sufficient for a 10% deposit for first-time buyers or 20% for other buyers, if they've managed to amass that in savings while paying South Dublin rents,
that is phenomenal.
They're definitely showing capacity.
Exactly, and the likelihood is that if they are renting in South Dublin, they have repayment capacity, that the mortgage repayment tends to be less than what they're paying in rental income.
And that doesn't surprise me at all. We're hearing a lot as well about first-time buyers returning to their family homes for a period of maybe a year or 6 months or whatever it is in order to save. Have you any data on this? Can you see how many of your applications or what proportion of your applications for first-time buyers are actually coming from people who are not renting?
Yeah,
or not paying rent, whether they're staying with a family member or something like that.
Without putting a percentage on it, we can definitely see a pattern of it.
So it is happening.
And what it tends to be is, you might have somebody who has proven the repayment capacity through the rent, but is struggling to make the 10%. And we can see that the repayment capacity is there and that they manage their finances very, very well. And in order to actually accumulate the 10% deposit part of it, they need to move home for a period of time to get to a point where they can go on the mortgage journey.
Is that somebody that you might consider then, say, for these coveted exemptions?
Yes, well, our criteria actually on exemptions are relatively clear-cut. So we focus on the net disposable income that each customer has. So I suppose we look at their income, and with their income we will take in their basic income. We'll take a percentage of bonus. In some cases we'll take a percentage of overtime if it's proven and consistent. So we look at that on one side of the page, and essentially on the other side of the page it is their mortgage repayment. We'll stress it just to make sure that if mortgage rates went up, that they still have that affordability.
What is the figure that you're stress testing to now?
So we will generally add 2% to the existing mortgage repayment. So it just allows for that little bit of leeway that if rates went up, that somebody is still able to afford it.
And of course, rates are going in the opposite direction.
We are absolutely in a very benign interest rate environment at the moment, so it shouldn't be of major concern. But I suppose this is also a 25 or 30 year commitment for people, so it gives us that bit of comfort. also on that side of the page, then we were looking at if they have personal loans or a regular credit card repayment, we'll need to factor that in, and ultimately that will arrive then at a net disposable income figure. If that income figure is high, that shows that they have capacity to take on more than 3.5 times their income, and that's probably eliminates a lot of the mystery in that essentially for exceptions, we and all the other banks are giving those exceptions to people that have the affordability for it.
Okay. Last year, one of the things we covered on the show here last year was that I think by March or April, Charlie Weston and The Independent ran a piece to say that the exemptions for the entire year had been used up. And that was in March or April. And then, maybe in September we had a mortgage broker in here saying, nope, still exemptions available. So what is the situation? I mean, can you look back on 2019 and say AIB as a bank used all the exemptions available to it?
We did, and I suppose one of our challenges internally is always to make sure that those exceptions are spread out over the year in the right way, and that we don't ever hit a point where in March we don't have any.
But is there a situation, because approval in principles, I mean, they're running up, 6 months now?
Well, we do 12 months.
Up to 12 months.
We do
so can somebody lock in an exemption for 12 months and not use it?
They can. So if you have an exception, and not all banks are the same, but with us, we've taken the view that, first of all, we were 6 months for an approval, but I think what has happened, it's taken people longer to find a home. And that kind of links into the supply challenge that we have. And for a customer starting off, to put them on a clock of 6 months, it felt unfair. So we widened that to 12 months. It gives them a reasonable amount of time. The other thing is they hold that exception for the 12-month duration. The positives of that is it allows them that time and space. The negatives, as you've rightly hinted at there, it does lock in that on our books for the full 12 months.
If they don't use it, if they go with another mortgage or...
Yeah, no, we would check in with them on a fairly regular basis to make sure that they haven't, if they've gone elsewhere, then
it comes back.
That comes back to us, yeah.
Okay, so look, I suppose in terms of the rates, where are we at the moment for fixed rates?
So we're in a quite a low interest rate environment at the moment.
Typical first time buyer mortgage.
Typical first time buyer mortgage for us. We offer actually our kind of latest good news is we've launched before Christmas a green mortgage at 2.5% for a 5-year fixed term.
I was reading about this. Can you actually explain what exactly that is, or what's the criteria?
Yeah, so the criteria are relatively straightforward. So that applies to both existing customers but also our new customers. And the customer needs to just produce for us the BER cert, the energy rating, that the energy rating for that home is B3 or above. So it kind of fits with AIB's overall sustainability agenda. But what we're finding as well is for a lot of first-time buyers, it's particularly useful because if they're buying new homes, almost every new home that's been built over the last few years will absolutely fly through that criteria. Mm-hmm. So it's something we're getting a huge amount of interest in.
And that rate again is?
2.5.
Okay, and how does that compare with your fixed and variable rates at the moment? So
the rest of our fixed rates are kind of 2.85, 3.15. At variable, we'll go down to 2.75 depending on your loan to value.
Okay, that's an interesting one. So earlier today, I was having a conversation with an estate agency that, is a hybrid offering online and traditional. And, two of the issues that they have at the moment in terms of digitising the whole process of buying and selling property, one is certainly the conveyancing and the slow adoption of digital technology or technology to innovate and speed up the conveyancing process. The other was around the mortgages, because we've seen such a huge progress made on the fintech side in Ireland. We have amazing technology here, and it's not all being used.
Yeah.
So where is AIB? That's an unfair question, but what can you tell us about adoption rates of technology within?
So again, and this is a reaction to customer behaviour as well, and customer feedback is changed the way we're doing business in terms of the face-to-face meeting. Initially, what we're trying to do as much of is, and this is quite, I suppose it's a bit of a bank word, do as much omni-channel business, in the sense that there are customers that want to do part of their mortgage journey face-to-face and meet us, but actually they want to be able to track the mortgage online. They want to be able to upload their documentation at home. They want to be able to check some of the detail online. So what we've done, actually, we've introduced it's called our Mortgage Express offering. So at the moment we're looking at about 6-7 out of 10 customers can go on this journey. We can give them an approval at the first meeting, subject to having certain documentation, and it holds as every other approval does for 12 months. But then from that point onwards, as well as the person they were dealing with initially, they can upload documentation. They track it on an app. They have a question and answer feature on it. So it probably... The
question and answer feature, is that... do you use chatbots
so they're supported by our own in-house team that'll contact them through the app. So what it does is, I suppose, it gives us, from our perspective, it probably meets that customer need of the modern customer in their 20s and 30s. A lot of their day-to-day dealings are on a smartphone.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily want to trail into a branch every time they want to talk to us.
They don't even want to pick up a phone. I mean, we're talking about an on-demand generation. They expect information on demand. But actually that speeds up everything because it works both ways. It means that consumers are making fast decisions about what mortgage product they're going to use. You know, they're making fast decisions too.
This is it. Yeah.
And I think that if we're going to increase efficiency around property and property transactions, it has to be the full chain.
It does. And I think what we're finding is, I don't think you could have the whole mortgage journey done through the app. I think customers are saying to us, it's nice to have you guys there to talk to face and to ask some of the initial questions. But really, once we've the initial meeting done, we're happy enough to use the technology after that.
Yeah.
So it's great to be able to blend the two. And I think that's probably the future for all aspects of the property chain.
Okay.
Legal and estate agent.
Actually, I wasn't aware of that technology coming out, but actually that's great to see. So we might look into that and have a further discussion about that at another time in a PropTech context. So before we let you go, have you any final advice for home buyers, whether they're first time buyers or those trading up or down over the next couple of months?
Come and talk. I think it is as simple as that. I think there's lots of information out there. Nothing beats sitting down and chatting through your own individual circumstances, and you know we're happy to talk to you and answer any questions you have.
That's great. Barry, thank you so much for being with us today. That was Barry Cull, Head of Homes in South Dublin for AIB. After the break, we'll be joined by David Rouse, Multi-Units Development Advisor for the Housing Agency. Stay tuned.
Broadcasting to South Dublin on 93.9. This is Dublin South FM.
And you're welcome back to Property Matters here in Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. As mentioned before the break, in studio with us now, we're joined by David Rouse, Multi-Unit Development Advisor for the Housing Agency. David, you're very welcome back to the show. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Carol. It's great to be back here again. Thank you very much for the invitation.
It is, and we're into year 2. So last year was a busy year for us and indeed for the Housing Agency. So you might just do a quick recap for people listening about what the Housing Agency does.
No problem at all. Thanks, Carol. We work with the Department of Housing, local councils, approved housing bodies and others in the housing sector. We're an independent organisation, but under the remit or under the aegis of the Department of Housing, and we deal, I suppose, with the pyrite remediation situation, where policy analysis and research centre and support to local authorities in terms of procurement and other similar services.
Very good. And you're here tonight to talk to us about a series of events that are taking place around the country. So obviously I mentioned there that you're involved with the multi-unit developments. So you might just talk to us a little bit about these events.
That's right, yeah. The context for this really is, I suppose, coming out of the report that we commissioned with Clúid Housing last year, and which you were kind enough to discuss with us in one of your programmes back in the autumn.
Of course, and that's available on your website,
it
that
is
report.
Indeed, yes.
Where
absolutely.
can people link to that?
Yeah, housing.ie, you'll find it in our publication section there. Okay. And out of that report and out of some work we've been doing otherwise, we've found, I suppose, a demand for knowledge and information in the multi-unit development sector, and in particular the owners management companies of these estates. So just to recap, I suppose, for people who may not be familiar, owners management companies are the entities that control the common areas and common spaces in apartment blocks. So the lifts, the lobbies, the gardens and all the rest of it.
So it's very important to point out here that actually the directors are the homeowners themselves.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. They're volunteer directors who are homeowners. They could be owner-occupiers or they could be landlords. And they are required really to make sure that the services to the estate are robust, that the sinking fund has been set up and that service charges have been collected and so on. So it requires a certain skill set, even though, as I say, the individuals, the directors are volunteers and lay people. They do have to have a certain level of information and knowledge out there. And that's where we're dipping our toe into the water, if you like, to provide some resources for them. And that's what our schedule of information outreach events over the next couple of months is intended to do.
Of course, and it's not just apartment blocks. Obviously, it's housing developments as well. I think
that's right. Yeah.
Certainly, owners management companies got a bit of a bad rap during the crash, where we were dealing with quite a chaotic environment. Yeah. So over the last number of years, obviously, we've seen legislation and we've seen policies to support that legislation. Yeah. So we're coming to the end of a lot of these legacy problems that might have caused untold conveyancing hassles for people. So now that we're maybe over the more chaotic side of it, what are the primary functions of these OMCs?
The primary functions is to ensure that the communities are sustainable in terms of being nice places to live, and that the finances are there to support the repair and maintenance of the common areas and of the gardens and landscaped areas and car parks and so on, and that the replacement of essential plant and machinery and common facilities is provided for from a financial point of view in the long run. So a lot of apartment blocks have large numbers of lifts in them, and eventually at some stage those lifts are going to become dilapidated and going to be replaced, and that takes a lot of money. So people need to be aware that they have to build up sinking funds to provide for that. And the directors of owners management companies are volunteers. They're not necessarily equipped with all the skills that would point them in the right direction of what to do. What we're there to do in these training sessions is to give them some signposts and give them some directions and where the resources are in the different state agencies and beyond.
Okay, and of course, while we're talking about the role of volunteer directors, it's important to point out that most OMCs would actually employ a property manager.
They would, absolutely. We're not there to sort of step into the role there. There are plenty of hardy professionals in the quantity surveying and auctioneering and valuation organisations and professions to provide the services to OMCs, but equally,
but they need to be paid.
They do need
to be gathered.
Absolutely, and it's in everyone's interests, both from a public housing point of view, a private housing point of view, that owners management companies are well run. So local authorities, approved housing bodies, and private individuals all have an interest in making sure that OMCs work well. They're the glue really that holds together a good estate where there are common areas, where there are shared services and shared spaces. And if we don't get this right, as our report reflected last year, it's really not going to make for pleasant places to live. We also have to keep in mind that national planning policies really are directed at higher density developments around the country, and that's not going to take the form of 3-bedroom semi-Ds. Unfortunately, it is going to take the form of apartment developments or duplex estates and so on, and invariably they will have an owners management company to run the common areas. There are about 8 or 9,000 OMCs in the country at the moment, and they have at least 2, 3, maybe up to a dozen directors each. So there's a large population of volunteer directors out there that have a spectrum of skills, and we're there to really, I suppose, as I say, point them in the right direction and give them the signposts of where to go.
On the ground, can you see the difference between those developments that might be primarily investor owned, or the units might be primarily investor owned as opposed to owner occupied? is there a difference on the ground? Like, are investors getting involved?
I suppose it's fair to say that the people most immediately concerned with the quality of an estate are those who live there. So essentially the owner-occupier cohort. And the numbers
if
we
they're
have...
the minority in a development,
well,
that can
they
get
certainly
frustrating.
are, yeah. The numbers we have is that only about 20% of apartments are owner-occupied. The remaining 80%, roughly 60% is private rented accommodation, and the remaining 20% is social or public accommodation.
And do we have any stats on the engagement levels of the owners, the investor owners?
Not yet, but that's something that the housing agency might undertake at a later time, building on the research that we did last year into the sector. Without a doubt, it'd be worthwhile understanding that.
Well, I think anecdotally, we would know that owner-occupiers take the lead because obviously they're most motivated.
Yes, yeah.
But that's quite a short-term view, given that the property is an investment, and an investment is only as good as it is growing and the area is maintained.
Yeah. The ideal owners management company would have a number of owner occupiers, a number of landlords, perhaps an institutional landlord represented, a private, as they say, mom and pop investor landlord. If there's an approved housing body, so one of the social housing associations,
I'd imagine they'd be very involved.
Yeah, they should have a representative ideally on the board as well, because as I say, it's in everyone's interest to make sure that the car is pointing in the right direction and that it's well fueled and well serviced and that the key components are going to be replaced in the long run, to draw that
there'll be
analogy.
money to replace those key components.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Okay, and the training, where are the training sessions happening?
Well, we have a number of them over the next 3 months or so. The first one is tomorrow night. That's Wednesday the 15th in the Crown Plaza in Blanchardstown. That's pretty much booked up at this stage. The next few are Wednesday the 29th of January in the Red Cow Mourne Hotel in Dublin, Wednesday the 5th of February in the Clayton Hotel in Dublin Airport, the 12th of February in Loughlin Bridge in Carlow, the 19th of February in Clayton Silver Springs Hotel in Cork, 26th of Feb in Castletroy Park Hotel in Limerick, 4th of March Talbot Hotel in Stillorgan, lots of places still available there, and the 25th of March in the Clayton Hotel in Sligo. So we have a large regional spread across the country.
And are these free to attend?
They are absolutely free to attend, but
place.
we'd ask that people would register via Eventbrite and contact us. You can full details are on our website, and there's a cup of tea and coffee for people when they come along. They might be coming from work. Crucially, these are evening events, so it's catering for people who are volunteers who are doing something else in their job or have other commitments in the daytime. They start at 6:45, so as I say, we'll have a cup of tea for people, and we'll kick off at 7. We'll have about 45 minutes, an hour presentation from the agency itself on the various resources available for directors. We'll put some context around legislation. We'll explain little bits about the Multi-Unit Development Act. We'll touch on company law principles. We'll talk about complaints processes, either complaints around corporate governance or the management agent or other aspects. And we'll finish up then with a question and answer session, so people are free to think on what issues they might like to raise at the end.
And absolutely. Okay, well, just to let people know that those dates have been uploaded to the Property District website, and I'm sure they're available on the housing.ie website.
They are indeed, or if you just check out under OMC in Eventbrite, you'll find them all as well.
Okay, and so let's delve a little bit deeper into the role of volunteer directors, because, look, people, while they might be concerned about their homes, the reality is people are busier. Whether it's young families, whether it's caring for people, managing their jobs and family commitments. I suppose people would be nervous about the time and the commitment required. Do you have a breakdown of what's expected of a volunteer director?
Well, I've been a director of my own owners management company for nearly 10 years at this stage, and I suppose the key things really are to have some awareness of company law and company law principles, because you are ultimately a director of a company. Now, will
you be providing some training on this?
As I say, in the space of an hour, we couldn't possibly get into the detail that we'd like to. So this is a sort of a signposts, key principles, key policies.
This what you want to know, and that's where you can find it.
Exactly, yeah. The concepts and the initial principles. But certainly down the road, we might get into delve deeper into the company law or regulation side of things as well. We're anxious, I suppose, to make sure that people know that there are resources out there for volunteer directors
and
help. Yeah, because some people are overwhelmed by the prospect of being a director of an owner's management company, and we're there to say, with good colleagues on a board. So, like any committee or any residents association, if you've 4 or 5 good people who are well intentioned, understand the principles, with the best interests of their estate and of their neighbours at heart, then you can go a long way, guided by good professionals, a good estate manager, a good solicitor for the estate if there are legal issues to be dealt with, and a good accountant as well who's going to do the books and look after it. So we'll tell them a little bit about each of those things.
Well, and the fact that all directors are living there themselves, there's a shared interest, there's a shared agenda there.
Absolutely.
In terms of, for example, one of the big roles would be to set fees, annual fees for the year, and then, of course, to collect those fees.
Yeah.
Now, I know there was some pretty poor statistics out last year about the level of management fees that go unpaid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have up-to-date stats on those?
Well, what we're looking at, I suppose, the research that we undertook, or that was undertaken on our behalf last year, indicated that a large number of owners management companies have debtors of up to half their turnover. So if that was a commercial business, it would be dead in the morning. So what we need to focus on is really setting good debt collection policies and sticking to them. And really, it's about engaging a good management agent and, if needs be, a good solicitor to put in place the paperwork to support good debt collection policies and to avoid situations where people are running into delinquency. So if you want to set a schedule of payments, an instalment arrangement or post-dated checks, anything like that, to allow people to be in good standing with their service charge debt, and then taking on the next step around the sinking fund provision, and again dealing with your management agent, understanding it. If you don't know the answers, at least understanding the questions to pose to your management agent and being able to take advice from them, being able to challenge that advice as well, because there can always be downsides and risks and other issues to take on board, taking into account the whole estate and all the issues that are there. So with the support of good professionals, a collegiate board of directors, people well intentioned, and estate can do well and can thrive. That's what we'd like to see.
Yeah.
The long title of our organisation, of the housing agency, is the Housing and Sustainable Communities Agency, and that's where this sustainability comes into play.
Absolutely.
We need to see that in the States.
And you referenced there the extensive body of work that was done last year by the housing agency and Clúid, and carried out by Paul Mooney of Benchmark Property. So there was a huge body of work. It was a huge undertaking. And there were a number of really key recommendations made in that.
There were,
Have they moved on at all?
What
was the next step to that?
Certainly, one of the recommendations was director training, and
was that to make it mandatory?
It was to make it mandatory. Whether that's possible, and the other recommendations are matters for people at a political level. But certainly, from our perspective, we have a training function in respect of for people in approved housing bodies and in local authorities, and equally in the social and public housing sphere, and equally the training function can touch and support on the private side of things as well. So we're making some initial progress on that particular aspect. Other recommendations of the report were around deeper regulation or wider regulation of OMCs themselves.
How have those recommendations been received?
Well, certainly the Minister was very supportive at the report launch, and I know there's been communication at some departmental level perhaps, but equally we're now in a situation of, I suppose, what they call PERDA, where policy changes are put, I suppose, in the deep freezer while our election is underway and so on. So we have to be conscious of that as well. But there's a lot of scope for progress, even possibly outside of legislation and regulation. And this is at least one step in that.
Well, the training and informing people, of course.
And in the meantime, we've put a lot of resources on our own website that people can access. So we have a huge frequently asked questions section dealing with company law, company secretarial matters, consumer protection issues, regulation issues in terms terms of property management agents. So we've taken steps in the meantime to put some resources behind this, and that's what I'm there for as well. We have a contact help point. Our email address is mud@housingagency.ie. If people want to get in touch with queries or questions, we'd be delighted to point them in the right direction. As I say, we're not there to replace the services of professionals in the sector, management agents and solicitors, but we are there to provide maybe an independent signpost to people if they want to know where to go to get particular pieces of information.
Okay, very good. And really what we'd like to see is in 2020, you mentioned there your work with the approved housing bodies. We've seen the approved housing bodies scale up massively.
Hugely,
in the Sunday papers last weekend, Tua Housing delivered more than 1,000 social homes. 1,000 social homes to the market over 2019, and I think that was the single largest annual delivery by any organisation.
Sounds about right.
And so that's phenomenal. There's gearing up there. So surely we're at the point where the collaboration can be between the private communities, social housing, and private investors as part of the same organisation.
Without a doubt, and the point is borne out by the fact that Clúid Housing were co-sponsors of the report on the sector, and they have, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 homes around the country and a huge amount of stock in apartment developments, and they have an involvement in several dozen owners management companies, and that's why they got behind it. But I think I'd perhaps like to sort of wrap up by saying the information on the sessions is there on our website. We're anxious that people housing.ie. We're anxious that people reach out. We're trying to put some resources behind the sector, and we'd welcome their participation.
Thank you so much. That was David Rouse, Multi-Unit Development Advisor for the Housing Agency. David, thank you so much for joining us. After the break, our final guest for today is John Egan, CEO of Bim Launcher. Stay tuned.
Your community radio for South Dublin. This is Dublin South FM.
Now, welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. As mentioned before the break, our final guest for tonight is John Egan, CEO of Bim Launcher. John, you're very welcome. So,
Thanks.
BIM is something that we've covered a lot on the show. We try to dedicate, at least 1/3 of the show every week to prop tech and emerging technology for the construction and planning sectors. So, BIM Launcher is something I was very excited to hear about. Tell me a little bit about the business.
Okay, so firstly, thanks for having me. I was delighted to get the invitation. So BIM is an acronym that stands for Building Information Modelling, and it's essentially the digitisation of the construction process. So the various different stakeholders that's engaged in the construction process will use many different specialised tools on a given project. A client will typically have a master project management information system. A contractor will have another project management information system. Tier 1 contractor would also have their own project. So everyone has their own management systems. And they're working collaboratively on developments of different pieces of the design, whatever it may be throughout the life cycle in these systems. But these systems are, they're disintegrated, so the information doesn't flow between them. So what you have is team members spending a lot of time moving data between the systems and trying to keep them up to sync manually.
Which doesn't make sense at all.
No, so it's very time consuming. 75% of them report that it has a medium to high impact on their actual productivity, and that's so. Obviously, and the other side of that is that these project management systems are increasing in popularity. So there's, like 90% of large construction projects are actually engaging with these.
Are they Irish statistics?
No, they'd be international.
Okay.
So
would you hazard a guess as to where Irish companies might sit in that?
It all depends on the size of the company, and
Okay.
it seems to be that the biggest contractors managing the bigger project and the bigger risk is actually engaging with the higher tech project management information systems.
Does that tend to be client led?
Yeah, exactly. So for a client, it minimises the risk. That's how they see it. So they're better able to manage and engage with the different stakeholders, and obviously be able to react better as time goes on in the project to any, if the schedule's gone out of sync with what it should have been.
So where does Bim Launcher sit with that?
So Bim Launcher is a technology platform that helps information flow between these project management solutions.
Almost like a translation tool.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, so it's an automated system that is that's set up in advance of the project, and regardless of the project management information systems that are actually being used on the project, it's configured in advance of the project, and it runs in the background and automatically syncs all the information between the different systems in real time.
So does that mean, and sorry now, my knowledge on this would be massively limited. So does that mean that each stakeholder can continue to use the interface they're used to?
Yes.
But they're getting access to the same information?
Yes. So with the way that it's done today, they exchange this information manually, which means they download files, upload files. They, use file sharing services like Dropbox, FTP servers, and various different systems like that. But they can never be sure about the information that they're viewing. So,
as in, is it the most recent?
Exactly. So when they can't trust in the project information, they need to go into the other systems, make requests for information to the various different stakeholders, and ensure that that information is actually, in fact, the latest information, which can be costly if they don't actually, if they don't have the latest information to hand.
Okay, John, what's your background?
Yeah, so I actually. I suppose this is my opportunity to plug my father's company. So I worked for him for 5 years. It was a subcontracting company, a floor screeding subcontracting company. Egan
What's the name of the company before your father gets out to you?
Egan Screeding. So
where is that based?
So it's in Galway, Connacht generally. I do some work in Dublin. And
very good.
Yeah, so when the downturn came in 2008, I decided I'd always enjoyed buildings. So I decided to go and study architecture. And when I started studying architecture, I got into the discipline of computational design, which was essentially, rather than going through this traditional design process that architect would go through, I was trying to describe the schema of the building in the computer and actually getting the computer to generate my designs. I also got into building information modelling at quite a young age. So that second year in university, I was all hands-on with all the BIM authoring tools. I was teaching them to my year. And then in that summer, I got an internship with Horley, a multinational engineering company. And I started working on improving their automations for within their internal workflows. So developing plugins for different softwares.
But you were developing those, you weren't introducing them into the company, you were actually developing them for the company.
So it was a very much so hands-on procurement process within the company. So we were actually working tightly with the actual teams that would be using the tools. And on the other hand, I was working with the software development teams to actually to build and deliver the solutions to the teams and managing that iterative feedback loop until we actually got the solution that they required.
That sounds like significant work for an intern coming in. I mean, was that the brief you had coming in, or was this an opportunity you saw when you got in?
Well, it was kind of that the BIM and computational design was kind of emerging. So like this was, say, 5-6 years ago, when it was really in its infancy. And I came in, I was really enthusiastic, this is what I did, like in my class was designing, as the lecturers taught design, I was in the computer labs from morning till night trying to teach myself this computational design. So I think that in a way they gave me the opportunity to come in and they just said, look, you're R&D. And when they seen it working, that we were actually building valuable solutions for the company, they really, they decided to keep me on for the year and a half. So I dropped my university final year down to 2 days a week. And worked for Horley 3 days a week. So I did a total of a year and a half in Horley, and then I set up my own BIM consultancy with an old friend, and we got introduced to building these project management information systems from scratch.
So what year was that when Bim Launcher came
So
about?
Bim Launcher came back about in 2017. So BIM Script, which was the first consultancy, was 2014. And that's where we started building the project management information
In 2014, you know, have you any idea what the BIM adoption rates would have been in Ireland?
Not in Ireland. I was in England all this time. So it was, England seemed to be a lot more, well, they are leaders, global leaders.
Would you consider the UK to be global leaders?
I would, yeah.
In BIM?
I would, yeah.
Okay, and
I think
where does Ireland sit in relation to the UK market?
Well, Ireland seems to be following slowly behind. I mean, in 2016, they obviously standardised the use of BIM on government projects in the UK. But before that, they had the frameworks in place, the working groups in place to actually procure this framework. When I came back to Ireland in 2018, my first introduction was actually a CETA conference in Galway, where they were talking about this roadmap to introduce BIM.
And actually, just because you've mentioned CETA, it's really important in this context to point out that CETA, that's the Construction IT Alliance, CETA, CITA.ie. They actually have 2 events coming up on digital transformation and a tech trend series. So I recommend anybody who is interested in the space, because they were also the organisation behind the BIM gathering. So if anybody's interested in the space and further information, go on to the CETA website. That's the Construction IT Alliance. But go ahead.
Yeah.
It's important to get that plug in, because actually one of the things we found is that as we move ahead with the technology, and I know we're comparing the UK market to Ireland, we also don't want to give the impression that actually anybody who hasn't already adopted it has in some way been left behind, because we know that the adoption rates even today are still low. We had a guest in here before the Christmas break, and we were trying to figure out, BIM adoption rates generally in Ireland, are they somewhere between 15, 16, 17%, somewhere around there? Would you have any opinion on that?
I won't have any more.
Yeah, well, look, we think they're somewhere around there, but today, how far behind, say, the UK? You describe Ireland as there's no shame in being a follower if you're going to be a fast follower, but you don't want to be a slow follower.
I mean, like, generally the technologies that were around in 2014, 2015, they were the same project management solutions that are around today. They generally have a couple of more features, but they're still marketing to the same points. They're still providing the same value and the same for the same user cases. I don't think, as a follower, I don't think that it's any disadvantage. I mean, there's international standards that can be adopted now. So there's ISO 19650, and what that has actually brought on is a whole load of other standards initiatives to help solve the problems that have been kind of burdening the use of BIM over the last, say, 5 years. So, like, we are moving as fast as ever in terms of BIM adoption globally, and that's driven by all sorts of things like housing shortages, homelessness, all the other things that is actually driving development. Yeah.
One of the things, when we discussed this in advance, one of the things you spoke about was this need to stop using valuable project human resources as a proxy for orchestrating project data. Explain to me, what are companies doing now that we need to focus on changing?
Yeah, so at the moment, companies are exchanging information between their systems manually, and they are focusing on. So what's entailed here is that, like, typically an intern or a document controller would sit down and they would, go through the latest documents in each system and then manually download them and upload them into whatever other system. So this goes back to the client owning the master system and then the contractors working through their own systems. So yeah, you've someone in the middle actually downloading and uploading and trying to keep track of metadata, trying to keep track of different revisions. And what's happening there is that you have a disconnect between the contractors and client systems where the metadata belong to each of the documents that might have been carefully assigned at the earlier stages of the project is actually dropping off as we move through the project. So what that does is affects our ability to produce what's called the golden thread, which is this information carry on from concept through to delivery and beyond, so that like every piece of, I suppose, thinking belong to any stakeholder that's worked on the project is not just there temporarily and lost, it's there forever. And that information then can be leveraged through the life cycle of the project and the building.
Okay, and the profile of clients that you're working with now, what would that typically be?
So large contractors. One of the design engineering companies that we've, I suppose, just started working with is, they're working on like the Sydney Metro. And these kind of projects.
So do you work on projects outside of Ireland?
Yeah, only.
Only?
Only. We don't have any customers in Ireland.
Why is that? Is it that you haven't focused on the Irish market, or you haven't promoted yourself to the Irish market?
I suppose we haven't. Like, it seems that the bigger companies seem to have, like dedicated people, so digital engineering leads that are focused on improving digital strategy and these workflows between different applications. And I think if you look at the Irish contractor, they're very focused on improving resource utilization and I suppose the other side of this as well is that it's a brand new solution. So, there's like, there wouldn't be, maybe they just, I suppose they aren't aware of the value that we could actually bring to their projects.
Well, one of the other things is that they might not see that having manual processes in between to connect this data flow, they mightn't actually see that as a problem because they're thinking, okay, well, we've increased the efficiencies on either side of that person. So having a person in the middle to connect them might not actually be identified as a problem.
Well, yeah. So I think it comes back to the person not actually being capable of moving the quantity of information from system A to system B. So like on a project, you're talking thousands of files, and those thousands of files might have 10 or 15 pieces of metadata that might move with them or are supposed to move with them. And because these systems aren't compatible, those metadata fields need to be mapped from, say, a creator in system A to what's known as an author in system B. So you have to do this process manually, and when information is lost off the file or the project, pretty much if information is lost, it increases the risk of the project overall. And in the event of a claim or anything like that, that's really, and I'd say that's why the bigger contractors are also more inclined to adopt this technology, is because they're dealing with such great risk, such great number of files.
Yeah.
And
Irish construction data, in my opinion, isn't really being addressed for the resource that it is at the moment. If anything, it's seen as a challenge. And in fact, through Property District, we've partnered with Dr. Hussam Jerby of Smart PMO to run a pilot project on Irish construction data for the first 6 months of 2020, where we're feeding data in to see just to see exactly what insights can we get, and it's so funny because we've been reaching out to companies, and I actually had one chap in a company say to me, look, we have all that information, it's in my head. And now this is a person who oversees many large projects, and he still sees the data being in his head, and he didn't feel that technology would be an adequate solution to that. So, when you're dealing with something like that, how do you go about convincing a construction company that there's value to be added?
So I think it comes back to the bottom line. So that's save on human resource as they're moving information inefficiently from system A to system B. An automated solution that pretty much is that robot in the middle that doesn't go for coffee breaks, doesn't need to go home in the evening, and
is always on the right side of health and safety.
Yeah. And sole job is to keep these systems in sync. I think that it can really bring together and integrate the systems and stakeholders on a project. And
okay. John, where can people find information about Bim Launcher?
So you find information about Bim Launcher at bimlauncher.com. I'm active on Twitter at _ John Egan. And LinkedIn, obviously.
So head over to bimlauncher.com for more information, and they can take it from there with you directly. Great. John, thank you so much for being with us today. John Egan of Bim Launcher. That's it from us in studio today. Thank you for joining us on Property Matters, the show where property matters. Get in touch with the show by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio or on Twitter @iPropertyRadio. We'd like to thank all of our wonderful guests here today. Also thanks to Peter Rice on sound and show producer Katie Talon. Back at the same time next week from myself, Carol Talon, and all the team here. Have a great week.